All right, this is the class number 9 on the mindful society. So Jeffrey Sachs wrote about his book, The Price of Civilization. And we've already had one excerpt from this book, and now we're going to read the first excerpt was understanding the problem that led to the economic collapse in the US. And then the second reading is about how to recover ourselves as a culture, not just working with economic statistics. We have to change our way of life. And so this very much is consistent with my own concern for Aristotle's virtues. So it shouldn't be surprising that Mr. Sachs does refer to Aristotle. I was surprised when I ran across an economist who does understand that, but he doesn't go into it in depth. And so I have gone in depth in previous lectures. So the students can read this and keep in mind those virtues. He mentions a few of them, but the students can understand it in a much broader way at this point. Plus, he also mentions Buddha. Elsewhere, he has mentioned Confucius and Alex. So it is important that we connect Aristotle's notion of wisdom with other wisdom traditions, because this one is not the only one. It's not better because it's Aristotle or because it's Western. As Aristotle would say, virtue is a way of life. And if using Confucius Analects leads to that way of life, go for it. If using Buddha and your experience with Buddhism leads to that way of life, fine. But it is the categories of Aristotle are the most comprehensive and systematic. I know, so that's why I use them. And you can use them to evaluate what Mr. Sachs says in the reading for today. So let's look at how all the readings fit together just for a second. We talked about the evidence of liberal arts, that students first and second generation who get a liberal arts education tend to disproportionately 30% more likely to engage in leadership, which would mean hopefully, that when they go off and lead in their societies, that they would be able to identify some of these social diseases, problems that Mr. Sachs has diagnosed, and be able to lead people out of them towards something better. We're worried about the fall of American democracy because there's so many analogies between the rise and fall of Athenian democracy and the nature and possible fall of American democracy. We're in a very disruptive time, so it's even more dangerous. Globalization did not work out the way it was supposed to, and American workers have gotten harmed by it, not just workers in the rest of the world. Because they've been harmed, they're also turning to China, and China makes deals with developing nations. We have to compete with them. We don't, for so long, we were the hegemon. Everybody just did what we said and they conformed. It's not true anymore. We have a geopolitical disruption. So we have to compete with China for making good green products, for offering loans to developing countries. And so it's more democratic in that sense. And we should applaud this, but of course, many Americans are not. But we shouldn't look for somebody to blame. So Sachs talked about how the US economy collapsed in 2007, how Americans spend way more time on TV or distracted than people in other countries, and we spend more money on consumer products, we're in more debt, we're distracted. Then because of globalization and because of the collapse, because of globalization, the way it's played out, societies all over the world that were democratic are starting to succumb to authoritarian leaders who claim that if they vote for them, they'll protect them from the greed of the West. And it doesn't work. They usually help their friends and harm their enemies. So things are becoming destabilized in this particular time. And the next lecture, I talk about Aristotle's virtues as a model for how to lead us out of this. And then I talked about our own founding fathers and their model of an educated voter, why they set up schools like Lyon to educate future leaders for the virtues. And now I'm going to go back to Mr. Sachs. And Mr. Sachs says that he talks about the mindful society. So he gives his own sort of diagnosis of the problem and his suggestions for where to go from here. And I would like my students to think about this. Okay. Many Lyon students have religious backgrounds, and so they understand spirituality. And so Mr. Sachs is recommending that we become more mindful, right? Buddha and Aristotle both arrived at the middle path. Aristotle called it eudaimonia, a good daimon, happiness. And it contrasts with libertarianism. So the Washington Consensus during the globalization process, it kept recommending cutting taxes for corporations. And that would lead and reducing regulations. They did it over and over again. It did not work. It's called libertarianism, neoliberalism. It did not work. Mr. Stiglitz said that. The third world, the developing countries that followed the Washington Consensus did worse, ended up with more debt, more suffering, more destruction of their environment, workers in a worse position than the nations that ignored us and followed the Northern European model of social democracy. So libertarianism does not work. Not every economist is a libertarian. Okay. It claims that the freedom of the individual is the only valid aim of ethics and government. Individuals know what is best for themselves and should be left alone, untaxed and unbothered by ethical responsibilities toward others, as long as they don't cause direct harm to others. Many of America's richest citizens do not show any ethical responsibility to others. So that idea of magnanimity has died, that it's important how rich people give back to the society for the well-being, social and political well-being. Aristotle also said there needs to be a very large inheritance tax so that the wealth does not keep getting passed down from one generation to another, and you have a completely isolated wealthy class. Again, the libertarianism rejects that. They got inheritance taxes cut. The other issue is individuals don't know what's best for themselves. They're impulsive. They don't plan for possible medical emergencies. They if they think they're on insurance or Medicare, there are many things that those programs do not pay. And so people are still going into heavy debt because of medical expenses. People do not know. They don't seem to care about public education. Um, maybe because many of them don't have children in the schools, or they don't, whatever they're doing doesn't require a high level of education, so they don't want to fund anybody to have a high level of education. Well, we can't compete in a STEM-based high-tech society if we don't educate the next generation in a high level of a combination of STEM and humanities. You can't have STEM alone, as Aristotle pointed out. And there's so many other things people need. Children need playgrounds. People need fresh, clean air, and the air is polluted in the big cities in the US. There's just many, many problems that constantly having this filter of the ideas of libertarianism prevents people from recognizing problems that are right in front of their face. Well, climate change is the obvious one. The climate is changing, and yet we still fall back. Just cut taxes for millionaires and billionaires, and it will all work out. It's just not true. And I hope my students will just get over that and they'll realize this is not working. So Aristotle and Buddha, we are social and political by nature. We become human in our relationships, not in isolation. And politics, meaning the creation of the polis, political association, is an integral part of each individual's sense of purpose. So some of the most meaningful activities we can engage in are the creation of institutions that function to provide opportunities for people to get into the middle class. They can be educational institutions or healthcare institutions, but they can be women's violence shelter or the Animal Humane Society or Wilderness Protection Society. We have lots of these organizations, and they give us dignity when we care about something greater than ourselves, something that really needs to be cared about. And that gives us a sense of purpose. Buying and spending, consumer goods, just buying consumer goods, going shopping should not be meaningful. It's a lower level of human functioning. That's just soothsaying the village, surviving more efficient. But at that higher level, this is where we really become human. The arts, creating artistic works, attending the works of others, imagining or meeting together with people you don't know, so in developing empathy so that you treat people as equal under the law, so you make laws that provide equal opportunity. All of these things are, to me, clearly what life is about. We should be mindful, right? Always keep in mind our having empathy. I mean, he lists these things. These are very much follow Aristotle's levels of the mindfulness of self is a personal virtues. Work would be the village, the economic system. That knowledge would be the intellectual virtues. Others would be the generosity, the friendships. Nature is free scientific inquiry. The future is passing on a stable life to the next generation, which is the biggest responsibility of every generation. And then politics is the polis, which I spoke about a lot, and then the international polis. not just your nation state. Beyond the craving for wealth, we have to change our attitude toward income and how we use it. We need to buy experiences, not things. So we make memories. This is where the whole idea that the most creative act you engage in is the creation of your life and your life story. And so that, the activity of shopping is not creating memories, or if it is, it's just the wrong memories, because then you will just think of the next thing you want to buy. I remember my sister-in-law. I never went to shopping centers. I hated them. Every once in a while I had to go because I had 3 kids. And I was always in such a bad mood afterwards because I knew that this is what I'm competing with as a philosopher, is that this is the reason people don't think about virtue or the philosophical kinds of things. They don't muse about it, they don't have time, or they don't get as engaged in social and political life as they could because they're going to the mall and making that into their social life. So experiences of hiking and attending concerts, there's so many things you can do, or helping others, volunteering. He says, engage in many small pleasures, and I think that's true. I think just little things like, and your body, if you have a generally disciplined life, your idea of pleasure is something that other people would be surprised about, but your body has been trained, right? So I don't eat desserts, but every once in a while, I'll go with my grandkids and we'll go get dessert. And that's special. And I tell them last time I did that, my my granddaughter got a dessert. I don't even think I got one because I don't like them that much anymore. But just these little things, they're so much fun when you've trained yourself to live a simple life. These small things really stand out. It's very pleasant. Um, so, and insurance, most of the things I buy aren't even new. So, but be careful about insurance. Um, Pay now. So save up for something you want to buy. Um, okay, attend to the details. Don't do comparison shopping. Just don't get obsessed about shopping. It's not that important. Have a sense, to me, it's just have a sense of your own dignity. And also just, if you keep in mind this model of flourishing, you'll keep your priorities straight and you'll have a much happier life. You can talk to other people about what makes them happy, but you can really spend your life obsessing about shopping. So, like my daughter-in-law, I thought she would go to the mall and she would come back thinking about what she didn't buy. I would go to the mall and feel horribly beat up and unhappy, but I bought, the mops and the detergent and all that stuff that we needed. Um, and I knew the difference between a need and a want. And because my husband and I just didn't consume unnecessary things. So our kids grew up knowing the difference between what they needed and what they wanted. And so when they started needing some things, I could make deals with them. I could, if they want a second pair of jeans, sure. If you want a 15th pair of jeans, no. I paid for the socks and the underwear, right? But I also paid for them if they made it on a sports team, right? If they made it on a dance team, or if it was some kind of activity, music, lessons, whatever, that's really important because that's educating your psyche, your soul, or a field trip, something like that. So we would fork up money for that. but not just stuff. So reflection, meditation, that's important. For me, I don't meditate that much because the way I think of meditation is that you're trying to clear your mind. And I try to do reflection where I'm just trying to sort things out and think about my life, where it's been, where it's going, and how I treated people that day, or what I did with my time. Did I really make the most of that day on my model of how can I flourish the most at this particular point in my life, in all these other contexts. But it's always, did I flourish today as much as I could? And of course, it's pretty unanswerable, but that's usually the question. Um, I was lucky. I've been very, very lucky because I do have meaningful work. So that's what I wanted for my children. I just told them that they should do their best in school. They don't need to overachieve or underachieve. Because if you overachieve, you're going to get in over your head and it won't be enjoyable. You'll be playing catch up. You might get used by other people who realize that you depend on outside validation because you're in over your head. Or don't underachieve because you'll end up working with people that um, you don't identify with. And often my children have sometimes been in situations where they think they're smarter than the boss. And you don't want to be in those situations for very long. And also the nature of the work. I told my children to just achieve at your level. And sometimes you don't know, where it's all going, but do stuff you don't want to do. And then after college, you just think, okay, as far as I know, what would I like to try? So they had their 5 or 6 Odyssey years to try a lot of stuff. And so when they got to their end of their 20s, they said, okay, Mom, this is what I want to do. And then they went to grad school, and all of them are doing things that are meaningful. And they have to do whatever they do well so that if they find the work not meaningful or if it changes, they can actually change jobs. And my daughter did that. She was working at the Department of Labor in DC, and it was on avoiding slave labor, working on national programs to help developing countries, making sure that their workers are protected, given decent conditions of work, things like that. And if they did, then they could export their products to the US without a tariff. And that's meaningful work. It's just that she had a boss at some point that she did not agree with what the boss's policies were. She had been promoted to be the deputy, who's the one who has to tell the people under her what to do, and the people under her kept quitting because it wasn't good. So finally she changed jobs, and she did have, the CV she needed to change, and so she could once again have meaningful work. And then after a while, she left that one, has another job. So it is important. And then my son is a inner city charter school principal administrator, and his wife is an inner city charter school teacher. That's meaningful work. It's not easy work. And I'm sure there are days when it's like, oh, you don't get paid much, but it's humane. It's human. You're relating to people, and you know that it's really important work, and that, you know, every day you can lift up those students, communicate to them through your body language, whatever, that they're important, and you'll do what you can to help them. And then my youngest daughter does nonprofit news journalist. So she can report on the things that people really need to know. Um, She started out an economics reporter, and now she's become an editor. But the newspaper that they put out, Connecticut Mirror, is a good newspaper. It focuses on policy, and the newspaper exposes corruption, but it also mostly just tries to explain what's going on and what are the policies and are they working. But when they expose corruption, it's taken care of. Somebody in charge reads their newspaper and corruption gets addressed pretty quickly. So that's great. So they all have meaningful work. That's important. And I want to communicate to my grandchildren that that's what they should do. At this point in history, I want to tell them, well, if you're oriented towards STEM, you can go into green technology. That would be incredibly meaningful work. But also, if you're really more of a social, emotional, you're a people person, teaching is always going to be a meaningful job. Or if you're interested in taking care of the elderly, there are going to be a lot of jobs in healthcare for aging people. I know that when my parents were in, I guess, nursing homes, the workers there had a nice attitude. They just loved the people, and it was that they had created a nice climate there. Okay, so what about knowledge? So we do have to, keep up with the scientific underpinnings of our lives. We have to find out whether the people leading us, people with power, are actually using it for the benefit of the people who need them and have scientific research based. Create, a point of view that's based on research. And this is very, very difficult at this point because of the algorithms, the way that if you have a bias, you will be constantly fed more YouTube videos or whatever links that pander to your bias. So that's also very worrisome. And that's also why you should live the truth. You should go out and make your community better, because then you can actually have conversations with real people and you can compromise and you can just create a community. You don't have to have these opinions based on some YouTube videos based on an algorithm, right? You can actually meet real people and help them out. It's much better. Revising compassion, addressing ecological problems. We are really in a bad place right now. But I do think the weather will change. We're in 2025. I think at least by 2030, the weather is going to change enough that even Americans are going to want to do something about it. But we have waited way too long, and I am sorry about that, but it will get better. And there are a lot of people making a lot of money on green technology. And I will tell my grandchildren that it's really a much more hopeful time than it used to be, because I knew about environmental degradation and nobody was talking about it, or as far as I knew, they weren't doing anything about it. But now it's really changed, and it can change really quickly. I know that. I know some of the things we've done to nature are irreversible, but I also know that there's a lot of things that are being reversed. Deserts are being turned into pasture land in China, but there are lots of other things that could be reversed, or we can find a way past it and still have flourishing lives. I do think many people will die. We won't be able to sustain 10 billion people, but we won't all die, which is what I thought for a long time. We really have a responsibility toward the future. Please Think of your carbon footprint. Take moral and practical responsibility for the future. The trends are really bleak, but step up, as long as you're alive, you should be living. You should be flourishing. You should be activities of soul in accordance with virtue. So we should take, the politics, we should look for politicians who really promote flourishing versus corporatocracy, which means corporations steal all of our money or prosperity. So we have three crises. One is ideological, this mistaken belief. Government needs to balance the market system. We have an institutional crisis because the corporate lobbies have so much power over the political system, especially, but over a lot of areas, monopolies in all the things we buy. And then moral, we need public deliberation. We need to demand to be informed, take seriously what you know, and not allow polarization to occur between citizens. So we need a global ethic, not just local or national. And we need to link our economies with laws and cooperation at the global level. Personal and civic virtue is an approach to life. We need to end military waste. Yeah, that's a problem. What are our ultimate economic goals? This is, as I said, he's very Aristotelian. So life satisfaction or flourishing for everyone, and have a new way to measure well-being. What was our budget deficit? We have a incredibly high deficit, but we have a lower quality of life. We don't tax. Our programs are lower quality, like public education. Our tax rate has gone down significantly since 1965. Things like a lot of income inequality has happened. In 1960s, the CEO at the top of a corporation made 60 times more than the receptionist. And I asked my students, how many times more should the CEO make? I mean, an 8-hour workday, right? There's 24 hours in a day. They can't work more than twice as many hours. But, okay, so that would be the CEO makes twice as much. Well, obviously they go to school, which is considered a problem, but okay, they have to pay for school. Or, they create a product and they contribute more. Okay. I mean, usually if the students are just brainstorming, I don't know, they'll come up with 20 times, 25 times, unless they've already had this ideology, like some of them. It's an ideology, let the market decide. But most of them are shocked, right? 60 sounds like a lot to them. Right now, it's more like 360. It's way, way, way out of hand. And all right, so we could tax carbon, and we could use that money to go to green energy. The putting solar panels on roofs and creating the whole system for a green economy is not going to be outsourced. It'll be people in the US. We have our gas tax has not gone up. We could have gas taxes on financial transactions. I mean, all of these things are what other countries have. But the tax percent that the rich pay used to be 34.5, then it was 23.3. Then it keeps going down, right? And the taxes of the poor get lower, but they have worse schools, worse transportation, worse housing. It doesn't pay in the end at all. We have a terrible problem with affordable housing. And again, that's just because the rich want to live in separate communities and they're not willing to invest or to pay taxes so the government could actually create affordable housing. So what are the 7 habits of highly effective governments? Citizens United in 2010 gave billionaires freedom to contribute as much as they want to political campaigns, and that's been an incredibly corrupting influence. The government has outsourced services to private contracts and contractors, and they're the people who pay the campaign bills. And the services cost more and they're worse. And they don't care about the quality. So this happened in the Iraq War. Okay, in the Iraq War, we outsourced people supplying food for the soldiers and a lot of military contracts. And the people who worked for these corporations never had to take any vow to represent our country or to refrain from excess behavior. If you're in the military, you do. You have certain vows you have to take because it's a matter of honor. You know, you're sacrificing for your country. But if you're in there just to make a buck, and they got paid twice as much as people who had done it who had been in the military, because it's just a competitive bid. And then the vice president, his company is the one that got these contracts, and they were no bid contracts, so he could tell our taxpayers how much it cost. He also overcharged. He was under 4 indictments for price gouging. And then, even though that was true, when Hurricane Katrina hit, which again, it's more severe because of climate change, he got the contracts to repair from Hurricane Katrina, but his company was already indicted 4 times. It was not a reputable company. So they made an incredible amount of money on that war. Then the failure to prevent 9/11, they claimed there were weapons of mass destruction and there weren't. The occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan were botched. I kept up with a lot of stuff, and it's all really, really bad, and it's all corrupted by greed. We need to set goals and benchmarks, mobilize expertise, make multi-year plans. This is very important. This is another reason the Chinese are just, advancing way faster than we are. They have a 5-year plan, and then they go and check it every 5 years. I don't really want the level of authoritarianism that China has. I'm a philosophy teacher. We get in trouble. We're the first ones to go in an authoritarian society, but we need to use our freedom to create a flourishing society. If we don't choose to be generous, to have a middle class, we'll lose it. And the Chinese will beat us out in green technology. They'll beat us out in a lot of things. They don't let their children look at social media. We're allowing our teenagers to get mentally ill from social media, which is a book that we will read. I think the next one. Yeah. So it's freedom means, your kid can use Facebook, social media as much as they want, even though the research is that it's going into the brainstem. It's triggering primitive drives, and it's driving teens crazy. So Mr. Sachs is just saying we have to go back to all those, remember those social networks, weaving people together. That was honor. Rational honor is that people go over and above their job descriptions to weave people together in a positive way. And then political association is even higher level, where we write laws that helps people flourish that we don't even know. So always doing what you do to help people flourish in immediate, your family, your friends, your organization, your community, but then also figuring out that even the people I don't know, people living under our laws, should also be allowed to and encouraged to and incentivized to flourish. So that's the lecture for today. All right. And I do think that Aristotle's virtues, again, they're comprehensive. You can look at a chapter like Sachs and read it through the filter of Aristotle's virtues, but also, as I said, Buddha, these other traditions. So they're all the wisdom traditions. We can bring it together and we can create a global, sustainable civilization. That is the goal.